At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed something odd on my name tag. It didn't say Alice Edwards or even grandmother of the bride. No, it read, "The old lady who's paying for everything." I'm glad you're here. Stick with me until the end, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. I've always believed that family celebrations should be filled with joy and warmth, moments that bring people closer. My granddaughter Jennifer's wedding was meant to be one of those cherished days. One you carry in your heart forever. Instead, it became the day I found out how my family truly saw me. That morning, I took extra care getting ready. At 65, I'm not one to obsess over looks, but I wanted to honor the occasion, and myself. I chose a soft blue dress that Robert, my late husband, had always loved. I carefully styled my silver hair and wore a touch of the perfume he gave me for our last anniversary before cancer took him 3 years ago. "You look lovely, Alice," I whispered to the mirror, pretending I could hear Robert say it. For a brief moment, it felt like he was with me. The ceremony at St. Mark's Church was beautiful. Jennifer looked stunning as she walked down the aisle, glowing with happiness. My son Richard beamed with pride as he gave her away, and even Pamela, my daughter-in-law, seemed genuinely moved. For a while, everything felt exactly as it should. Then came the reception. At the entrance to the Westbrook Hotel's grand ballroom, guests were collecting name tags and table assignments. I smiled politely at the young woman behind the table as she searched through the cards. "Here you are, Mrs. Edwards," she said cheerfully, handing me mine. I glanced down, expecting it to say Alice Edwards, grandmother of the bride. Instead, in graceful, flowing script were the words, "The old lady who will pay for everything, my gal." My hand froze midair. This had to be some sort of mistake. "Is something wrong?" the young woman asked, noticing my reaction. I forced a smile. "Just a mix-up, I think." She leaned forward to double-check, her expression turning sheepish. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me see if we printed another one." "Don't worry," I said quickly, not wanting to cause a fuss on Jennifer's special day. "I'll speak with my family." I pinned the name tag to my dress, my cheeks burning with shame, and walked into the ballroom. Was this Jennifer's idea of a joke? Richard's? Pamela's? During cocktail hour, I tried to carry on as if nothing were wrong. Most people either didn't notice my name tag or were too polite to bring it up. I made small talk and smiled through it, until I overheard something that made my heart sink. "Did you see the grandmother's name tag?" someone whispered, barely suppressing a laugh. "Pamela said they thought it would be hilarious," another voice replied. "Apparently she's their personal ATM." My hands trembled as I slipped away from the group. Just then, Richard spotted me from across the room and waved me over. "Mom," he called. "Come meet the Andersons. Dad used to golf with Bill." I walked over reluctantly. Bill Anderson looked vaguely familiar, likely one of Robert's old business partners. "Mom, this is Bill and Martha Anderson," Richard said, then chuckled, "also known as our walking bank account." Martha's smile faltered as her eyes flicked down to my name tag. Bill looked visibly uncomfortable. "Alice Edwards," I said, extending my hand firmly. "Robert's widow." "Of course," Bill replied gently. "Robert spoke of you often. He was so proud of you." The conversation went on, but I barely heard a word. When the Andersons moved along, I pulled Richard aside. "What is this?" I asked, pointing at the name tag. Richard laughed. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be so sensitive, it's just a joke. Everyone knows you're footing the bill since Dad left you everything." "It's demeaning," I said softly. "Lighten up," he replied, rolling his eyes. "It's a party." Before I could say more, Pamela appeared, poised in her elegant dress. "There you are, Alice," she said. "Has Richard been showing you off? We want everyone to know who made this beautiful day possible." She winked, and they both laughed. I excused myself and made my way to the restroom, desperate for a moment alone. As I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, the door suddenly opened, and then quickly closed again. A moment later, I heard a voice from outside. "Mrs. Edwards? Alice? It's Martin Reynolds, Robert's attorney. May I speak with you for a moment?" I composed myself and stepped out. Martin had always been kind, he'd handled Robert's estate with great care. He gave me a sympathetic glance, then looked awkwardly at my name tag. I sighed. Apparently, it's all just a joke. His expression turned serious. "It's not funny." And Robert would have been furious. He hesitated. "There's something he asked me not to share. Unless the time came when it was necessary." Martin reached into the inner pocket of his suit and pulled out an envelope. "This is a codicil to Robert's will," he said. He added it not long before he passed. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. The legal jargon was dense, but the message was crystal clear. If any of Robert's heirs publicly humiliated me, they would be disinherited from their portion of his estate. And Robert's estate, I now realized, was significantly larger than even I had known. I stared at the page, stunned. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked. Martin's voice was soft. "Because he hoped it would never be needed. He wanted them to treat you with love and respect, not because they feared losing money, but because they truly valued you." I glanced back toward the ballroom where my family carried on celebrating, completely unaware that their actions had just cost them millions. "What do you want to do?" Martin asked. I folded the document carefully and handed it back to him. "Nothing. Not yet. I need to see how far they're willing to go." As I returned to the reception, the name tag pinned to my chest felt heavier than before. But this time, instead of shame, a different feeling was rising within me, a growing resolve to finally see my family for who they really were. The morning after Jennifer's wedding, I sat alone at my kitchen table, still in my bathrobe, staring at the offensive name tag I'd placed in front of me. The elegant script mocked me, "The old lady who will pay for everything." I traced the letters lightly with my fingertip, thinking about how Robert might have reacted if he'd seen it. His temper was rare but fierce when someone disrespected those he cared about. "They've changed," I whispered to the quiet room, as if Robert could hear me. "Or maybe they've always been this way, and we just didn't want to see it." I got up and moved to the living room, drawn to the large family portrait hanging above the fireplace. It was taken 5 years ago on our 40th anniversary. Robert sat proudly in the center, still strong despite the early signs of the illness that would later take him. I stood beside him, my hand resting on his shoulder. Richard and Pamela flanked us, and Jennifer and her brother Michael, then teenagers, stood in front. We looked happy. We looked like a family. When had it all changed? That question haunted me as I brewed my morning tea. Maybe the shift had been gradual, so subtle I hadn't noticed respect slipping away until it was gone. My earliest clear memory came just 6 months after Robert's funeral. Richard and Pamela had invited me to dinner, an unusual gesture back then. They were attentive, asking about my health and sharing fond memories of Robert. Then, over dessert, they got to the real reason for the visit. "Mom," Richard said, refilling my wine glass, "Pamela and I have been talking about remodeling the kitchen. Nothing major, just new appliances, countertops, that sort of thing." "That sounds lovely," I said, unaware of what was coming next. "The thing is," Pamela continued smoothly, "with college tuition and everything else, we're a bit stretched right now." I remembered the pause, the looks exchanged between them. "Are you asking me for money?" I asked carefully. "Not asking," Richard said quickly. "It's just, Dad left you comfortable, and we thought maybe you'd want to help the family." That night, I wrote them a check for $30,000. Looking back, that was the beginning. Small favors grew into bigger demands. A kitchen remodel became a full home renovation. Tuition help turned into luxury cars for Jennifer and Michael once they turned 18. Family vacations I was invited to join came with an unspoken expectation I'd foot the bill. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out a box filled with financial records. Sitting on the floor like a schoolgirl, I sorted through bank statements and canceled checks. The evidence was overwhelming. Over 3 years, I had given them nearly $250,000. The phone rang, interrupting my count. It was Pamela. "Alice, are you home? I've been calling your cell." I hadn't even noticed it was still tucked inside my evening purse. "Yes, I'm here. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she said smoothly. "Richard and I just wanted to thank you. Wasn't yesterday's wedding beautiful?" "Yes, it was lovely," I replied. "Jennifer and Mark are so grateful for your generosity. They couldn't have had such a wonderful day without you." I closed my eyes, thinking of the $45,000 check I'd written for the venue and catering. I was happy to help. "Actually," Pamela continued, her voice sliding into that familiar syrupy tone. "Mark's parents were supposed to cover the honeymoon, but his father's business has been struggling, and they had to back out. Jennifer is just devastated." I knew what was coming next. "We were wondering if you might be able to help. They're hoping for 2 weeks in Bali. Richard and I would pitch in, of course." With everything spent on the wedding, the expenses I'd covered almost entirely, I surprised myself with my response. "I'll think about it," I said, non-committal. There was a pause. "Well, they need to book soon for the best rates." "I understand. I'll let you know tomorrow." After hanging up, I returned to my financial excavation. Robert had always warned me about Richard's view of money. "He thinks money can fix everything," Robert had told me once. "But money without values just creates more problems." I hadn't fully understood then. Or maybe I didn't want to. A knock at the door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw Michael, my grandson, shifting nervously on the porch. I quickly gathered the scattered papers and hid them back in the closet before opening the door. "Grandma," he said, stepping inside to hug me. At 21, he was tall like his grandfather, with the same kind eyes. "Are you okay? I've been texting you." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired after yesterday." "Come in." He followed me to the kitchen, where I put the kettle on for fresh tea. Michael had always been different, more thoughtful, less caught up in appearances or status. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday," he said, sitting at the table. "The name tag, the way everyone was talking, it wasn't right." A lump formed in my throat. "You noticed?" "Of course I noticed. So did a lot of people." He looked down, clearly embarrassed. "I should have said something," he murmured. I gently patted his hand. "It's not your job to correct your parents. That responsibility falls on me, to stand up for what's right." He met my gaze. "Dad and Mom, they've changed since Grandpa passed. Or maybe I just never saw it before. All they ever talk about is money, your money, specifically." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious. Michael hesitated. "Last week, I overheard them talking about your house. Dad said it's too big for one person, and they could help you downsize." The kettle whistled, giving me a moment to take in what he'd said. As I poured hot water over the tea bags, my thoughts turned to Martin Reynolds and the cautionary clause in Robert's will. I thought about the name tag, the never-ending requests for money, and now this apparent scheme to push me out of my own home. "Grandma?" Michael's voice pulled me back. "Are you sure you're all right?" I set the teapot down and sat across from him. "I'm better than all right, Michael. I think for the first time in years, I'm finally seeing things clearly." "What do you mean?" I smiled, making a firm decision. "It's time for some changes around here." As we sipped our tea, I studied his face. Was he truly different from his parents, or were the seeds of entitlement simply lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to sprout? For the first time since Robert's passing, a cold clarity replaced the grief and loneliness I'd felt. I wasn't about to rush into anything, but I would watch, closely, and wait to see who in my family truly deserved the legacy Robert left behind. 3 days after the wedding, Richard and Pamela hosted a post-wedding brunch at their country club. I debated whether to go, but curiosity won. I wanted to find out if the name tag incident was just a one-off or part of a troubling pattern. I arrived at Oak Ridge Country Club wearing a simple yet elegant cream pantsuit Robert had always said made me look regal. Inside the private dining room, I spotted several familiar faces from the wedding: Jennifer and her new husband Mark, Michael, and other relatives and friends. "Mom, over here," Richard called, waving me to the head table. Pamela, dazzling in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, greeted me with an air kiss. "Alice, you look nice," she said, her tone tinged with mild surprise. "We saved you a seat right here." I took my place, noticing I'd been seated next to Mark's parents, strangers to me, instead of beside my grandchildren. The brunch went smoothly until Pamela raised her glass to get everyone's attention. "We want to thank everyone for coming today and for making Jennifer and Mark's wedding so special," she began. "And of course, a special thanks to Grandma Alice, whose generosity made it all possible." All eyes turned to me. Pamela continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We have an exciting announcement. Grandma will be funding Jennifer and Mark's dream honeymoon to Bali." A smattering of applause followed. I sat frozen, coffee cup halfway to my lips. I had made no such promise. "Mom?" Richard prompted when I didn't immediately respond. I carefully placed my cup down. "This is the first I'm hearing of it," I said evenly. An awkward silence fell over the table. Jennifer looked confused, then embarrassed. Mark stared at his plate. "Well, we discussed it yesterday," Pamela said with a brittle laugh. "Remember? You said you'd think about it." "Yes, I said that. And I'm still thinking." Richard leaned in, lowering his voice but loud enough for others to hear. "Mom, don't make a scene. We already told them they can book the trip." Something inside me snapped, a thread stretched too thin for too long. "I don't recall agreeing to pay for a honeymoon to Bali," I said loudly so everyone could hear. "As I understand it, Mark's parents were originally supposed to cover that expense." Mark's father shifted uneasily. "There were some business setbacks," he muttered. "I understand," I replied kindly. "These things happen. But I think it's wrong to offer someone else's money publicly without their consent. Don't you?" The table fell silent. Pamela's face flushed red. "Perhaps Jennifer and Mark should consider a more modest honeymoon," I suggested quietly. "Something within their means." "Their means?" Pamela hissed. "Everyone knows Robert left you more than comfortable." There was something in her tone, the entitlement, the bitterness, that made my decision crystal clear. "My finances are not up for public discussion," I said firmly. "Nor are my spending decisions." Richard grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in sharply. "Mom, stop it. You're embarrassing us." I pulled away. "No, Richard. You've embarrassed yourselves." I stood up, smoothing my jacket. "Jennifer, Mark, I wish you both all the happiness in the world. I'd be happy to contribute to a reasonable honeymoon, but we'll discuss that privately." As I turned to leave, Michael stood too. "I'll walk you out, Grandma." In the lobby, away from prying eyes, my composure finally cracked. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys. "Are you okay to drive?" Michael asked gently. I took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm fine. Just a bit shaken." "You should be proud of yourself." That took courage. I looked at my grandson, really looked at him, and in that moment, he reminded me so much of Robert that my heart ached. "Would you like to come over for dinner tonight?" I asked on impulse. Michael smiled. "I'd like that." Later that evening, as we shared a simple meal of roast chicken in my kitchen, I found myself opening up to Michael about his parents' behavior over the past 3 years, the constant financial demands, the slow erosion of respect. "I'm not surprised," he said quietly. I've seen it happen. After Grandpa died, it was like they started seeing you as, I don't know, an ATM. I nodded. Exactly. And it's only gotten worse. Last week, I overheard them talking about your house again. What did they say? I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. Michael hesitated. They were planning how to convince you to move into Sunrise Acres, the retirement home. I was stunned. My house, my sanctuary, was filled with memories of the life Robert and I had built. Dad said it would be better for everyone if you downsized. He mentioned the real estate market's hot right now and how they could help you get the most out of it. I felt sick to my core. They weren't just after my money, they wanted my home too. Michael, there's something I need to tell you, I said, deciding to trust him with the truth about Robert's cautionary clause. But before I could go on, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Richard's car in the driveway. It's your father, I said. Michael's expression hardened. You don't have to answer it. But I was done hiding. No. It's time to clear the air. I opened the door to find Richard standing there, his face flushed with anger. What was that performance at brunch? He demanded, pushing past me into the hallway. Then he spotted Michael. What are you doing here? Having dinner with Grandma, Michael replied calmly. Something the rest of you might try sometime, without always asking for money. Richard's face darkened. Stay out of this, Michael. This is between your mother and me. No, I said firmly. If we're going to have this conversation, Michael stays. I'm tired of the behind-the-scenes manipulations. In that moment, looking at my son's angry face and my grandson's protective stance, I knew we'd hit a breaking point. There was no turning back. I've had enough of your attitude, Mom, Richard said, pacing the living room like a caged animal. First the scene at brunch, and now I hear you've been poisoning Michael's mind against us. I sat calmly in Robert's old armchair, hands folded in my lap. Michael stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, watching his father with a mix of disappointment and resolve. No one is poisoning anyone's mind, I replied evenly. We're simply acknowledging what's been happening in this family since your father died. And what exactly is that? Richard demanded. You and Pamela have been treating Grandma like a bank, not a person, Michael said before I could answer. You've been spying on us. Richard's face darkened further. I've been paying attention, Michael shot back. Something you might try sometime. Richard turned to me, his expression shifting to that familiar coaxing tone he used when he wanted something. Mom, you're misunderstanding everything. We're just trying to help you manage your finances wisely. You're not getting any younger. I'm 65, Richard, not 95, I interrupted. My mind is perfectly sharp, and I'm fully capable of handling my own affairs. But Dad left you so much. I held up my hand to stop him. Robert left me exactly what he intended. His estate is not a family piggy bank. Richard's fake smile vanished. So what, you're cutting us off because Pamela made a stupid joke with a name tag? I'm saying from now on, I'll make my own decisions about my money and my home. If Jennifer and Mark want a honeymoon in Bali, they can save for it like most young couples do. And if you and Pamela want a bigger house, you can work for it. Richard stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Then he turned to Michael. I want to speak to my mother alone. I'm staying, Michael said firmly. This is family business. Exactly, Michael added. And I'm family. Something shifted in Richard's expression, a calculation, a reassessment. He'd always been able to manipulate me when we were alone, playing on my grief and desire to keep the peace. But with Michael present, those tactics wouldn't work. Fine, he snapped, heading for the door. But this isn't over, Mom. Not by a long shot. After Richard left, Michael exhaled deeply. I'm sorry, Grandma. For what, sweetheart? You haven't done anything wrong, for not standing up sooner, for letting them treat you this way. I stood and pulled him into a tight hug. You're standing up now, and that's what counts. Once Michael left, I sat alone in the quiet of my home, thoughts swirling around Robert, the codicil in his will, and the family we'd built. Had we gone wrong somewhere with Richard? Or had he always carried this streak of entitlement we failed to notice? More importantly, what was I going to do now? The answer came slowly, forming in my mind like a photograph developing in the darkroom. Instead of confronting Richard and Pamela directly about the codicil, which would likely make them change their behavior out of fear, not respect, I would let them reveal their true nature in time. Meanwhile, I would quietly reclaim my life and my independence. The next morning, I called Martin Reynolds. "Alice," he answered warmly. "I've been hoping to hear from you after the wedding." "Yes, that's part of why I'm calling," I explained the brunch incident and Richard's visit afterward. "I need to understand exactly what Robert left in his will. Not just the codicil, but everything." There was a pause. "Perhaps this would be better discussed in person. Could you come by my office this afternoon?" 3 hours later, I sat across from Martin in his tastefully furnished office. As he detailed the full scope of Robert's estate, the figures took my breath away. "Robert built several companies over the years," Martin explained. "And sold them at just the right moments. His investments were very conservative, which helped weather the economic downturns well." "I guess we're comfortable," I murmured. "Robert was private about money," Martin smiled. "He always said you married him when he had nothing but potential and a beat-up Chevy. He never wanted you to become one of those women who care only about designer labels and country club memberships." I chuckled softly, hearing Robert's voice in those words. That sounds just like him. As for the codicil, Martin continued. It's straightforward but powerful. Any descendant who publicly humiliates you loses their entire inheritance. The name tag incident at the wedding would definitely count, and so would the brunch incident, most likely. But Alice, you don't have to decide anything right now. The codicil stays in effect during your lifetime. I nodded, thinking, what if I wanted to make some changes to my own will? To how my assets are managed? Martin leaned forward. What did you have in mind? By the time I left Martin's office, a plan had taken shape, no dramatic confrontations, no ultimatums, just a quiet reclaiming of my life and my power. First, I called my old friend Ellen, whom I hadn't seen much since Robert's death. We arranged to meet for lunch the next day. Then I stopped by the community center and picked up a brochure for their adult education classes. Robert had always encouraged me to pursue my passion for painting. Perhaps it was time. At home, I sat at my computer researching small business loans. Michael had mentioned wanting to open a bookstore after college but worried about startup costs. Investing in my grandson's future felt like a perfect use of some of my resources. When my phone rang and Pamela's name appeared, I let it go to voicemail. The old Alice would have answered immediately, anxious about what demand or emergency awaited. But that Alice was fading, replaced by a woman finally recognizing her own worth. Later, I listened to the message. Exactly what I expected. Alice, it's Pamela. Richard told me about your conversation last night. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We've always had your best interests at heart. Richard and I thought we should have dinner this weekend to clear the air. Oh, and Jennifer mentioned you'd reconsidered the honeymoon. They need to book soon to get the best rates. Call me back. I deleted the message without calling back. Instead, I opened my checkbook and wrote a modest check as a wedding gift for Jennifer and Mark. Enough for a nice honeymoon, but in New England, not Bali. I slipped it into a card with a warm note wishing them happiness and sealed the envelope. My silent strategy had begun, no confrontations, no drama, just quiet, firm boundaries. Robert would have approved. 6 months passed in a blur of quiet yet meaningful changes. I enrolled in painting classes at the community center, reconnected with old friends, and spent more time with Michael, who visited often. I gave him seed money for his bookstore business plan, which was progressing beautifully. Meanwhile, Richard and Pamela's attitude toward me swung between cold distance and desperate attempts to regain access to my finances. When the silent treatment didn't work, they'd suddenly show up with forced smiles and obvious excuses to visit. Each time, they steered the conversation toward money, a renovation they were planning, Jennifer wanting to buy a house with Mark, or their own worries about retirement. Every time, I gently declined, repeating my mantra with a growing confidence, I'm managing my finances myself. They didn't handle the refusal well. Pamela's texts turned sharper, Richard's calls grew more insistent. But I'd found new strength in my silence and in the boundaries I was finally setting. Today was my birthday, 66 years old, and despite my protests, Michael had insisted on organizing a small family gathering at my home. It's time they remember whose house this is, he said with a grim determination that reminded me so much of Robert. I spent the morning in my garden, deadheading roses, finding calm in the simple task. The garden had been another casualty of the last 3 years, neglected while I catered to Richard and Pamela's demands. Now, it was coming back to life, much like I was. By mid-afternoon, my home was ready for guests. Michael arrived early to help with last-minute touches. Are you sure you're ready for this? He asked, arranging cheese and crackers on a platter. As ready as I'll ever be, I said, smoothing my new dress, a bold red I'd never have chosen before. Besides, it's just dinner. But we both knew it was more than that. It was the first time in months that the whole family would be under my roof, Richard and Pamela, Jennifer and Mark, and even a few of Robert's old friends, including Martin Reynolds. The doorbell rang right at 5. Richard and Pamela stood on the porch, their smiles so fake I could almost hear them stretch. Happy birthday, Mom, Richard said, handing me a bouquet of store-bought flowers. Alice, you look different, Pamela added, her eyes taking in my dress, my styled hair, the subtle makeup I'd learned to apply in a community center class. Thank you, I replied simply, stepping back to let them in. Jennifer and Mark arrived moments later, followed by Martin and another couple who had been close friends of Robert and me. I navigated greetings and small talk with a calm I would have thought impossible 6 months ago. As we settled in the dining room, I caught Richard's gaze moving around the house, assessing, calculating. Pamela's eyes kept drifting to a new painting I'd hung, a landscape I'd created myself. Did you redecorate, Alice? She asked, her tone hinting she was unsettled by the changes. Just a few updates, I replied. I've been taking painting classes. Painting classes? Richard echoed like I'd just said I was learning to pilot spaceships. Grandma's really talented, Michael said proudly. She's already sold 2 pieces at the community art fair. Pamela looked genuinely puzzled. But why sell paintings? I smiled. It's not about need, Pamela. It's about joy. An uneasy silence fell over the table, broken when Mark asked about Michael's bookstore plans. It's coming along great, Michael said. Thanks to Grandma, I have the business plan finalized and am looking at locations. Richard's head snapped up. Thanks to Grandma? What does that mean? Michael met his father's gaze steadily. Grandma's investing in my bookstore. Richard's voice rose. With what money? My money? My money, I said quietly. Richard started, then caught himself, glancing around the room. Maybe we should discuss this privately, Mom. There's nothing to discuss, I replied firmly. I'm making my own financial decisions now. Richard's face darkened. He looked like he wanted to argue more, but Jennifer interrupted with a story about their honeymoon to Cape Cod, the destination they'd chosen after receiving my modest gift. The tension eased a little. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Pamela cornered me in the kitchen. Alice, what's going on with you? She hissed. First you refused to help with the honeymoon, then we hear nothing for months, and now you're throwing money at Michael's pipe dream. It's not a pipe dream, I said calmly. It's a solid business plan. Don't be naive. Bookstores don't make money anymore. He's using you. No, Pamela. I'm supporting my grandson's ambition. There's a difference. Her eyes narrowed. Richard and I have been talking. We think it's time you consider moving somewhere easier to manage. Sunrise Acres has lovely apartments, and selling this house could help all of us. There it was, the plan Michael had overheard, now out in the open. This house is not for sale, I said firmly. And my living arrangements aren't up for family discussion. Before she could reply, Richard appeared in the doorway. Everything okay in here? Just wonderful, I said, picking up the cake I'd baked that morning. Shall we have dessert in the living room? Richard cleared his throat just as I began cutting the cake. Before we move on, Mom, there's something Pamela and I want to discuss with everyone. My hand froze on the knife. This wasn't part of the evening I'd planned. We've been concerned about Mom's recent decisions, Richard announced to the room. She's making unwise financial choices, isolating herself, and refusing family guidance. A stunned silence filled the room. We think it's time to consider a power of attorney arrangement, for her own protection. Martin Reynolds set down his coffee cup carefully. That's a serious step, Richard. Do you have evidence of diminished capacity? She's giving away money to fund a bookstore in the digital age, Richard replied as if that explained everything. And she refuses to consider sensible downsizing. A strange calm settled over me. This moment had been inevitable from the day I started saying no. Your mother seems perfectly competent to me, Martin observed. Making decisions you disagree with isn't proof of incapacity. You don't understand, Richard insisted, his voice rising. She's always depended on Dad, then me, for financial guidance. Now she's making irrational choices. Enough. I set down the cake knife. I am not irrational, incapacitated, or in need of your guidance. Richard, Mom, be reasonable. I've been reasonable for 3 years, I interrupted firmly. I've covered renovations, vacations, cars, and a wedding. I've let you treat me like an ATM instead of your mother. But that ends now. Richard's face flushed a deep red. Is this what you want? He demanded, sweeping his hand around the table as if to shame us all in front of everyone, to cast us as the villains. No, Richard, I said quietly. You've done that all by yourself. He hissed, standing so abruptly his chair nearly toppled over. You selfish old woman. After everything we've done for you, Pamela said, tugging at his arm, suddenly aware of how their outburst looked to the others. But Richard was beyond caring. You think you can just cut us off? Dad would be ashamed of you. Right then, Martin Reynolds cleared his throat and said the words that would change everything. Actually, Richard, he began. Your father anticipated this very situation. The room fell into stunned silence. Richard froze, mouth slightly open, as Martin reached into his jacket and pulled out a familiar envelope. Robert added a codicil to his will shortly before he passed, Martin explained to the shocked group. He was concerned about how Alice might be treated after he was gone. What kind of codicil? Pamela demanded, finding her voice first. Martin glanced at me silently for permission, I nodded. The codicil states that any descendant who publicly humiliates Alice forfeits their entire inheritance, Martin said steadily. This includes disrespecting her, trying to control her finances against her wishes, or attempting to force her out of her home. That's ridiculous. Richard sputtered. Dad would never. He did, Martin interrupted firmly. And as executor of his estate, I've been documenting these incidents over the past several months. He turned to me. Alice, I need to ask, do you want to enforce the codicil? All eyes shifted to me. I looked at Richard and Pamela, their faces now pale with shock and dawning horror. I glanced at Jennifer, who seemed confused and embarrassed, then at Michael, whose expression held nothing but quiet support. Yes, I said finally. I do. Richard slumped back into his chair. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied. The name tag incident at the wedding, the honeymoon announcement at brunch, the constant money demands, and now this attempt to declare me incompetent, enough. It all stops today. But our inheritance, Pamela whispered. Is forfeited, Martin confirmed. All of it. Jennifer spoke softly. I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have said something at the wedding about the name tag. I reached across the table and took her hand. We all make mistakes, sweetheart. The important thing is what we learn from them. So what happens now? Mark asked, putting his arm around Jennifer. According to the codicil, Martin said. Richard and Pamela's share of Robert's estate is redistributed. To whom? Richard demanded. Half goes directly to Alice, Martin explained. The other half is divided among descendants who have shown her proper respect and care. All eyes turned to Michael, who looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know, he said quickly. I swear, Grandma, I had no idea. I know, sweetheart, I assured him. Your grandfather would be proud of the man you've become. Richard stood again, his face twisted with anger. This is a setup, a conspiracy. I'll contest it in court. You're welcome to try, Martin said calmly. The codicil is legally binding, and we have ample evidence. Pamela began hesitantly. Honey, surely we can work this out as a family. We never meant. Save it, Pamela, I cut in. It's too late for that. So that's it? Richard demanded. After everything we've done for you, you're just cutting us off? No, Richard, I said, standing to face him directly. After everything I've done for you, I'm finally standing up for myself. That's the difference. The gathering ended soon after. Jennifer and Mark left with awkward apologies and promises to call soon. Richard and Pamela stormed out without another word. Martin and the others made polite exits, leaving just Michael and me in the sudden quiet of my home. Are you okay? He asked, helping clear the barely touched dessert plates. I'm better than okay, I said, surprised to find it true. I feel free. A year later, I stood in the doorway of Chapter 1, the bookstore Michael had finally opened in a charmingly converted Victorian home downtown. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting a warm glow over shelves filled with thoughtfully chosen books and cozy reading corners. A coffee bar run by Michael's girlfriend, Emma, offered locally roasted coffee and homemade pastries. In the children's section, a mural I had painted stretched across one wall, a whimsical forest filled with hidden animals and fairy houses, inviting young readers on little adventures. Twice a week, I hosted story time for neighborhood kids, something I never imagined I'd do before. The small apartment upstairs had been refurbished, not for me, as I still cherished my home filled with memories of Robert, but for a young writer-in-residence program Michael created using part of his inheritance. The doorbell jingled, and Jennifer came in, gently pushing a stroller with her 3-month-old daughter, Roberta, named after her grandfather. Grandma, Jennifer called softly, spotting me. I didn't know you'd be here today. Just dropping off some new bookmarks I painted, I said, bending to admire baby Roberta. Hello, little one. Over the past year, Jennifer and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship after the initial shock of the inheritance revelation. She'd made genuine efforts to connect with me, separate from her parents. Mark had been a grounding influence, encouraging her to form her own opinions instead of simply echoing her mother's. Richard and Pamela were another matter. After several failed attempts to challenge the codicil, they had relocated to Florida, where Richard took a position with a former business partner. Our contact was now limited to Christmas cards and occasional updates from Jennifer. Have you heard from your parents lately? I asked as Jennifer settled at a small table with the baby. Mom called last week, she sighed. Same old story, complaints about Dad's job, the house they had to settle for, how unfair everything is. I'm sorry. Don't be, Jennifer said firmly. They made their choices, and I've made mine. Emma arrived with coffee and fresh scones, cooing over the baby before heading back to the counter. Michael appeared from the back room carrying a stack of new books. His face brightened when he saw us. Perfect timing, he said, joining us at the table. I wanted to run an idea by you both. He explained his plans to expand the store's community outreach, literacy tutoring for adults and writing workshops for teens. It would require reinvesting some profits, he added, but believed it was worth it. I think it's wonderful, I said, feeling a swell of pride as they talked through the details. I looked around the sunlit bookstore, a beautiful space that stood not only for Michael's dream but for a new chapter in all our lives. Since the inheritance revelation, I had rediscovered parts of myself long dormant. I'd made new friends, nurtured my painting, and even begun traveling. First weekend trips, then a 2-week tour in Italy with a group of seniors. There, I met Claude, a widower from Boston with kind eyes and dry humor, who now called me every Sunday. Robert would have approved, I thought, not just of the bookstore or my growing independence, but of the boundaries I'd finally drawn. He tried to protect me with his codicil, but in the end, I learned to protect myself. Jennifer's baby let out a happy gurgle, pulling me back to the moment. This was my family now, not perfect, not whole, but real. We were building something new from the pieces of what we'd lost, and in its own way, it was beautiful. What do you think, Grandma? Michael asked, drawing me into the conversation. I smiled at my grandson and granddaughter, at the baby who was our future, and at the bookstore born from trust and respect, not obligation or greed. I think, I said softly. This is exactly where we're meant to be.